Perfect. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We are so excited you're here. My name's Erin Bown-Anderson. Again, I'm the Director of Community Innovation at Geeks Without Frontiers, and I help to run the Program Management Office for the N50 project. It's my pleasure to be the MC for this exciting N50 for WomenKind speaker series with my colleague Angie Marr, Director of International Programs. For WomenKind is N50's team of women thought leaders who empower women and girls through digital access and participation. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the N50 project, the N50 project is a global program focused on accelerating digital adoption and community enrichment through innovative applications, network design, and business models to enable the next 3 billion people to participate in the digital world. Broadband adoption is being accelerated and sustained through N50's commercial, nonprofit, government, and community partnerships. Over 150, almost 158 now, organizations from throughout the digital ecosystem have joined, and together we make up the N50 ecosystem. Of these partners, we have an incredible legion of talented women leaders, again, from throughout the digital ecosystem, all touching different parts of the value chain. And our collective commitment to digital participation includes a commitment ultimately to communities, and specifically the experience of women and girls as access is expanded, skills are developed, and impacts are made. Our goal is to ensure that women and girls have increased and sustainable access and opportunities to education, healthcare, leadership, and economic security. Our For WomenKind group membership includes women who are members of N50 partner organizations. And if you're on this call and you're not yet an N50 partner, of course, we would love to add you to that ecosystem. In the chat, we'll drop a link to become a charter supporter that will activate the process of onboarding you to this phenomenal team. The For WomenKind team meets monthly and every other month. That meeting includes a featured speaker like we have today, and we invite all advocates for gender equity to these calls because we believe that the changes necessary belong to all of us. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speaker today, Claire Sibthorpe. Claire is the head of digital inclusion in the Mobile for Development M4D team at GSMA. She leads the Connected Women and Connected Society programs, which are focused on accelerating digital inclusion for the underserved in low and middle income countries. Connected Women has a specific focus on accelerating digital and financial inclusion for women. Claire has been working for over 25 years with public, private, and international development organizations on social policy and service delivery with a focus on information and communications technology, policy, and practice. She has developed, managed, and implemented programs in Africa, Asia, and the UK. Claire holds an MSc in social research methods and an MSc in social policy and planning in developing countries from the London School of Economics and Political Science. After Claire provides her presentation, we will have time to ask her questions. And that's really such a rich component of this presentation. So please put your questions for Claire in the Q&A or in the chat. If it's in the Q&A, we can upvote and like one another's questions so that I can prioritize those and help to moderate that conversation. So thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to Claire. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be with a group that are equally passionate about this issue. So I was going to share some of our results from our latest research and some of the work that we're doing. So I'm just going to share my screen one minute. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, perfect. So just to, oops, sorry, 1 second. Okay, yeah, so just to contextualize some of the research I'm going to be sharing, we do research every single year on the, for the last 6 years, on the kind of looking at what is the mobile gender gap in low and middle income countries. And we specifically focus on mobile because, well, when were the GSMA too, but it's the main way that most people, particularly women, access the internet in low and middle income countries, and often the only way they access it. The findings that I'm going to share, they're drawn primarily from a consumer survey that we conduct every year, as well as supplemented by other third-party data. It's a nationally representative survey that is conducted face-to-face, and we've been doing it every year since 2017. And we do it every year because we think it's absolutely critical that we continue to collect data to see how the gender gap is changing and how things like the pandemic and other crises are impacting women's digital inclusion. So that's what I'm going to start by sharing. So what this slide is showing is that you can see that every year more women are using mobile internet than ever before, but you can also see that their rate of adoption has now slowed for the second year in a row. And this is shown in the graph by the red portion of each bar, which represents the number of additional women who adopted mobile internet that year. And you can see that since 2020, it has gotten smaller. What we saw was a big uptake in mobile internet adoption by women during the lockdown period of the pandemic, as women had to get online to help educate their children, et cetera. But as the economic impact of COVID and other things hit, we saw the slowdown in digital inclusion for women. So what is also worrying in our latest surveys, you can see from this, is that men's rate of adoption is also now slowed in the last year, so between 2021 and 2022. So we can see that digital inclusion in low-income countries is now slowing, which is concerning. In terms of what this means in terms of the mobile internet gender gap, you can see that it had been decreasing significantly. So in 2017, women were 25% less likely than men to use mobile internet, and that had reduced to 15% in 2020. So that was good news. There was a significant gender gap, but it was decreasing. However, the story is not looking so good anymore. Our latest estimate shows that this progress has been slowed for the last 2 years. This is a result of the slowing adoption rates that I was just showed in the previous slide. So the gender gap remains substantial, and it unfortunately in the last 2 years has not been reducing. And so in the previous slides, I showed how we need to do a lot more if we're going to try and address the digital gender divide. And so we started this year, we looked at the estimate of what exactly do we need to do to try and put it into kind of context. So the gray bars on this chart show, they represent the men and women who are already using mobile internet in 2022. If the gender gap remains unchanged, you can see that more men than women will adopt mobile internet by 2023, as you can see in the red bars, and a significant gender gap will still persist. But to close the gender gap by 2023, we have to more than double the number of women who are currently forecast to adopt it. So you can see from this, we're showing that a total of 810 million women would need to adopt mobile internet by 2023 to close the gender gap, which is equivalent to about 100 million women each year on average each year that we have to do. So if we just continue as we are and make no specific actions, we are going to see a significant gender gap. So we're sort of targeting about 100 million a year on average based on current trends if we're going to close the gap. And I think what this graph is showing is that these gender gaps differ by region. And I think it's important to look at where we need to focus our efforts in terms of where the gender gaps are biggest. They vary significantly by region, by country, and within country. So of the sort of 900 million women in low and middle income countries who do not use mobile internet, almost 2/3 live in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is where the biggest gender gaps are. It's 41% South Asia, 36% in Sub-Saharan Africa. By comparison, in regions like Latin America and the Caribbean, it's as low as 2%. So this just highlights some of these regional variations. And if we're going to look at what we're going to do to close the gender gap, we need to understand what's preventing women from owning a mobile phone and then starting to use it to meet their life needs. So we have kind of a very simple framework. It's not a linear journey, but we use this as a way of sort of looking at the gender gap. And you can see that when you look at this from women owning a phone to starting to use mobile internet, the gender gap widens at each stage of this journey. So the mobile ownership gender gap is 7%, and that has remained unchanged, which shows that since we started measuring it, which shows that reaching that last group of women who don't have a phone is proving very difficult. But it's also important to look at the type of handset that women own, as smartphone owners are significantly more likely to use internet. And we see that women are typically own more basic handsets than men. And in terms of smartphone ownership, they are 17% less likely than men to own a smartphone. And again, this smartphone gender gap has also stalled, like the internet gap, for the last 2 years. If you look at awareness of mobile internet, while women are still less likely than men to be aware of mobile internet, awareness levels are relatively high. There are over 80% of men and women aware of it in the 9 of the 12 countries we surveyed last year. But we're seeing that awareness does not always translate to adoption, and particularly among women, we see that mobile users who are aware of the internet are not using it, significant numbers, so that they're highlighting that there's other barriers preventing them from doing so. And I showed the mobile internet gap, it's 19%. But it's also important not just to look at whether women are adopting mobile internet, but whether they're able to use it in different ways and to meet their life needs. So that our research is showing that once women do use the internet, they tend to use it every day, but that they use it for a limited range of purposes, particularly women. And what we found last year was that women who were already using mobile internet were more likely than men to report having reduced their use in the last year. So we asked, in the last year, did you reduce the amount of internet used? And women were more likely to do that. And particularly women who are rural and less educated, which I think just highlights how the kind of economic crisis has impacted those who are most disadvantaged. If you look at the kind of barriers along this journey, we see that the top reported barriers to mobile internet ownership and use typically are affordability, particularly of handsets, literacy, and skills. And these barriers have not really changed since 2019. So you can see across low-income countries for mobile phone ownership, the top reported barriers are affordability, particularly handsets, and lack literacy and skills. And they didn't change in the last year in terms of the ranking. And in terms of mobile internet use, the same affordability, particularly of handsets, literacy, and skills. Again, those barriers remained unchanged in the last year. These are the same barriers that both men and women face, but women are disproportionately face them because of structural inequalities around lower income, lower education, and social norms. So we're seeing the barriers are similar. And there are some national variations, but quite similar, but they are disproportionately impacting women. We also, in our report, looked at the kind of economic and commercial impacts for doing so. So the commercial opportunity for closing the mobile internet, for the mobile gender gap, is significant. We estimate that closing the gender gap in both mobile ownership and use represents a $230 billion opportunity for the mobile industry, with at least 85% of this commercial opportunity is derived from closing the gender gap in use rather than ownership. And in our survey, we also asked people, both men and women, about the impact of mobile internet use, and across the survey countries, significant portions report how much it is impacting positively on their lives and how they're using it every day. So there's clear benefits to trying to address this. When we look at what can we do to address the mobile gender gap, we have quite in our report, which I'll share the link at the end, we have quite a few recommendations, but basically they sum, into three kind of broad categories. I mean, one, we need to focus on gender equality and set targets to reach women. We need to improve the quality and availability of gender disaggregated data. We need to explicitly address women's needs, circumstances, and challenges, and we need to collaborate with different stakeholders. And I've just sort of been sharing a bit about how things are not looking great, and how the gender gap is not reducing and women's digital inclusion is stalled. So I just wanted to, before I open up for questions, I wanted to sort of end up with a bit of hope. So we have at GSMA, we have a Connected Women Commitment Initiative where mobile operators make commitments with targets to reduce the gender gaps in their mobile internet and mobile money customer base. And we launched this initiative in 2016, and we have over 40 operators who've made commitments, and they've reached over 65 million additional women. So even in a context with a stalled gender gap, they are making significant progress and reducing it in their markets. So that's a very positive. So it is possible with targeted action to make a difference. We did an evaluation a few years ago to look at, what is it that was they did that was making that difference. And it links to the kind of recommendations I highlighted. So, including a focus on female customers, setting those targets and having them endorsed by and communicated by the leadership, and having that at an organizational level, those targets made a significant difference. Ensuring that they had nominated people who are driving these actions. Understanding and getting on top of the data, but not letting it prevent people from taking action. And we see in a lot of countries, the gender data is not always accurate because women will often register, men will often register on behalf of their wives and daughters. So the data that people have of their customer base is not always accurate. That should not prevent people from setting targets and doing the best they can with the data. We always advocate for and support people to improve their data, but not let it stay in the way. Really having that data on what women's aspirations and barriers are, and then really establishing that commercial opportunity from the outset, making sure this is something what is being done can scale, and it has a clearly commercial, scalable proposition. Where our partners have made huge impact is where they've really holistically addressed women's barriers and aspirations, where they look at both the barriers and aspirations from both the product and service design as well as the marketing and distribution angles. And again, where they've partnered and they've adapted. Often it's typically adapting and tweaking existing products and services to reach women, to having that really gender intentional approach rather than necessarily launching new products as service, but existing mainstream ones, and really having that gender intentionality and really considering women at each stage of that journey in terms of the product design, implementation, marketing, distribution, has made significant differences. I mean, I mentioned earlier that there was the kind of two top reported barriers were around handset affordability and literacy and skills, but there's obviously a whole range of barriers, all of which underpinned by social norms. And just to kind of provide a small example of what people are doing, and many of the operators and our partners are tackling these barriers holistically. So for example, looking at approaches to lower the costs of handsets through device financing and other initiatives, but then also including within those products, those activities, training to reach women that make sure that they're looking at women's needs and circumstances, looking at how that could include issues around safety and security to improve women's safety and security, ensuring that the marketing and awareness raising activities speak to women's needs and preferences, making sure that there's relevant content available as well as they kind of roll out some of these services, and considering things like the roles of gatekeepers and others as they try and kind of drive out access to these services. So this is sort of the top 5 barriers that we're seeing in our research and work that is preventing women from going online. And I say what we're seeing is when you kind of holistically address these barriers, that's when you can have the biggest impact. And I just wanted to leave with the 2 reports I've mentioned. This is the link to our mobile gender gap report. I say it's every year we publish it. So this is the link to the most recent one, and also a practical guide reaching 50 million women, which is based on the evaluation that we've done with our partners around what's worked and what's not. And I wanted to also highlight that we wouldn't be able to do with this without the support of the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office and Swedish International Development Agency, who've been very graciously and helpfully funding this data. I'm a big believer in data and evidence-based approach. Without knowing the data, without knowing what's happening, without having this data, it's not possible to know where to focus our intervention. So I'm incredibly grateful for our donors who support us and enable us to continue to collect this year on year and to see the impact of COVID, and to see just how big an impact it's having on women. So I think I'll stop now and I'll open up. Hopefully that was interesting to see, what the data is showing and some of the things that some of our partners are doing.
Yes, thank you so much, Claire, for that overview and just diving into some of those slides. I was, still taking in some of the data that you were sharing. So I want to go back a little bit, and we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. And so, just to kind of recap, and you addressed several of them already, but just to make sure that you've answered the question that the questioner intended. The first one had to do with the definition of mobile internet. How is it defined? Is it similar to the ITU? How do you, when you talk about the mobile internet, can you make that distinction for us a little bit about specifically mobile internet versus other internet uses?
Yeah, so we look at specifically other people are accessing the internet on a mobile through their mobile device. The ITU measurements. So the ITU data is quite similar to ours, and the trends are the same. But they measure whether anybody's using the internet anywhere. It could be on a public access point. It could be on a shared device or a computer. But because most people in low and middle income countries predominantly access it, almost exclusively access it in the mobile, our numbers are quite similar, but you'll see their numbers might be a teeny bit higher because it also includes shared access of the internet and fixed line and sort of community access as well in their numbers. So, okay, but the trends and the kind of general levels are not very different. Yeah. Okay.
All right. And I actually see Lousy has her hand up, and I was about to head to your question, Lousy. So if you'd like to come off of mute, you can ask that. Hopefully that works. There she is.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Claire. Thanks a lot for your presentation. Very, very interesting. And I know I asked a question, which you probably already answered, because I was asking what the reasons were for the significant gender gap that is experienced. And then I noticed you've talked about low and middle income countries, one of which I am from. This is Zambia. And I just wanted to know, considering the gender disaggregation data, what sort of women were you looking at particularly? Were you looking at those based more in urban areas, peri-urban or rural areas? Because you also mentioned something about social norms. So what was your target population, or how was your sample distributed in that regard? That's one. And then two, notice that the interventions being carried out by your partnership with mobile phone operators in certain countries, I noticed Zambia isn't there. And is there a chance of you reaching out to the MNOs here, or are you working with only specific MNOs in those countries where you're carrying out those interventions?
Sure. Good question. So first, our survey is nationally representative. So it's completely nationally representative face-to-face survey. So it's based on like census data, et cetera. So it's really, that's how we're able to kind of model and understand the national gender gaps and the regional gender gaps, because it's nationally represented and done face-to-face. So I said that the gender gap has not been reduced in the last 2 years, but actually in Africa, it's quite alarming. Africa and South Asia have the largest gender gaps. And in Africa, the gender gap has remained unchanged despite all our efforts since we started collecting the data in 2017. So in South Asia, it had gone down and then went up a bit. But in Africa, it's been, despite a huge amount of efforts by so many people, it has remained unchanged since we started collecting the data. So clearly, we need to figure out what we can do differently and better. So in terms of the operators, So it's basically any operator who wants to make a commitment is welcome to and will support. So it's really up, it's open. We have our members, so our members are mobile operators, so we invite them to make commitments, but we'll happily work with anybody who really cares about this issue. So if you also wanted to engage with us, we're happy to engage. So in terms of who's made commitments, it's we just made it open to all our members, and some have made commitments in the past and have achieved what they wanted and not renewed. Some have not made commitments, some have made commitments. So it's really it's sort of, we don't have any particular, it's just Africa and South Asia that we have funding to support, but it's open to anybody, and we're also happy to talk to anybody who cares about this issue. So
Right.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question?
Sure, Lousy.
So I know you've been collecting this data from, you said 2017,
yeah.
and it seems like good research to me, and you obviously have lessons learned and recommendations. And I also think, isn't it then a bit alarming, if not worrying, that there's been no change in Africa? And
Yes.
is there anything being done differently, or have your recommendations been taken up even as you get in to do the survey after the previous year's interventions?
Yeah, so I would say that because handset affordability is reported as a top barrier, what we saw in South Asia, there was a big drop in the gender gap. I mean, South Asia had the biggest, and then it dropped quite significantly. And that was really driven by India, which saw a really low cost handset come in. And so prices also went down in India quite significantly. So when we did our research, we attributed a lot of the reduction in South Asia to handset reduction. And Africa has the largest sort of in terms of cost of handsets. So we've just published for example, our State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report last week. And we look at handset affordability there, and it shows that in sort of sub-Saharan Africa, for the poorest 20% in the region, an entry-level internet-enabled handset costs 97% of average monthly income. So that's huge. So I think that is a key, was a key driver in Asia, and I think that's a key barrier in Africa, just the costs compared to income. Although, as I said when I shared my, these things all need to be packaged together. We really advocate, if you're, driving something around handset financing or affordability, you really need to think about also the skills available, to use the handset, relevant content, some of those other issues. But I would say that is handset affordability is a very significant challenge, and is the thing that we did see making a big difference in South Asia. When those costs went down, we did see the gender gap decreasing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. And those kind of hit on a couple of the questions that are coming up, but I may kind of reword some of these just to see if we can tease out some more really important information. From a colleague from Geeks Without Frontiers, N50 has multiple projects underway that could serve as a platform for implementation of gender-related solutions. Would that be a good place to start? Is there a GSMA program where N50 and its partners could collaborate to address gender-related challenges? And are there GSMA N50 teams that could be formed to prepare proposals that would specifically target some of these gender projects, or spearhead some new gender-related projects? What are your thoughts on that, how partners could come together to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This needs to be done in partnership. There's really no actor that can do it on its own. In fact, our mobile operator partners are almost always operating, in collaboration with others. So I would say, if anybody has a gender project, and definitely reach out, be very keen to know what it is, very keen to see if we could facilitate any engagement with our members, or see what we can do on it. We're very, yeah, I think it absolutely it needs to be done in partnership. And I think there's not enough people doing things. So if people have projects or things, we'd be certainly keen to hear about them. And there's not just us, but there's many forums where things like equals, the kind of which is a kind of group of actors who are coming together as a global partnership on the digital gender divide. It's exactly what it's set up to do. So if people want to share, I'm very happy to hear, and also see if there's any partnerships or facilitation we can help, either with our members or through some of the platforms that we're engaged with, to see what we can do.
So, and kind of jumping over to the chat a little bit to pull in this question about, are there some specific low-income countries that come to mind that are doing maybe a better job? And I know we had the blanket statement about the state of Africa in general, but are there some countries that are doing a better job than others of connecting early digital literacy skills with girls with eventual women access in their countries to mobile internet use?
I'm not sure. I mean, the countries we see ups and downs. We saw, like I say, in India had been, until 2000 and the last couple of years, have been significantly driving the gender gap down. But now that's no longer the case. I would say that there's very interesting initiatives being done, by different players that we're seeing results. So we're seeing now, some very interesting things. They need to still be evaluated. For example, with device locking now available, where it's enabling sort of the financing and microfinancing of handsets in a way that wasn't possible before, because you didn't have things like device locking. So it was very hard to, those initiatives are ones that are combining like operator data as kind of providing kind of credit for women who don't have assets, providing kind of credit worthiness, operators linking with their data with sort of financing institutions, and then giving these sort of micro loans with the risk guarantee that the devices can be locked if people don't repay after a certain period. These are all quite new, and they still need to be evaluated, but I think there's some interesting things. There are some big plays on this literacy front. For example, we work with Reliance Jio in India, and we've been working with them on a national campaign they've just now rolled out across India to deliver digital skills specifically for women, specifically for rural women, and for them it's a big national play. So we're seeing a lot of initiatives, and often I say, which I think is good, is combining a lot of these sort of handset financing are combining with skills training and other sort of support. So I think there's a lot of promising things, but I think the challenge is how do we deliver at scale, and I think we do need to think about how we do things differently, because the gap had been reducing. But because the economic crises that we're now seeing are so disproportionately impacting women, which is why this affordability issue keeps coming up as being a top barrier, we need to think, how do we address it? Because unfortunately, women are just being left further and further behind because of the kind of crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And social norms is just so hard to address as well. We see lots of people trying to do things on social norms, but it's a very tricky issue to address. Yeah.
Right. And that taps into another question around device ownership. Is it possible that devices are registered to a man but used by the whole family, or are these truly used as personal devices? What use cases tend to drive female ownership of devices from your research?
Yeah, we ask about whether phones are shared or not in our research. And in some countries, there are some little bit higher levels of device sharing, but in general, they are predominantly as sort of people owning themselves. What we see is that the question is, if a phone is technically owned by a woman, how much time does it stay in her hands? There's questions around that. People say they're not share. It's not a shared device, but maybe in some countries the device may not may be borrowed periodically throughout the day by different people, but it's not technically a shared device. So yeah, some countries have higher levels of device share, but not in general. It's not so. With a few exceptions, it's not so common. And sorry, what was the second part of that question? Was about how much it stays in the hand, and there was a second part, I think.
What use cases tend to drive ownership of businesses?
Yeah, so when we've done quite a bit of research of what around, and we have some specific reports on it where we looked at what triggers mobile internet adoption. So we did a study a few years ago. We looked at people who were living in areas of coverage and they could afford a device. So we're still not using it. What were the things that could trigger or not trigger, essentially the low hanging fruit, which is still a significant portion of the population. And so the most common first use case that people go on in terms of the internet is communicating with friends and family. That's by and large, like most people, they go online. That's what they do. They're on WhatsApp, we're talking to friends and family. When we checked, what we found is that, which is why we saw a big jump, I think, during COVID, is that in countries with strong social norms, for women to be able to go online, it has to be a socially acceptable use case, and it has to be economically justifiable. So that's why I think we saw a big uptake in women's digital inclusion in India the first year of lockdown, because the justification was women needed to go online to educate their children because the schools were closed. Or again, where we see that there's maybe with female micro entrepreneurs, or there's a strong kind of economic kind of argument for them to go online. But if it's not socially acceptable or economically justifiable, in many countries, it can be very hard for women to go online.
Yeah. So great. It's an interesting, there are just so many intersecting challenges, right? With socially acceptable, economically viable, affordability, all of those things coming together makes this uniquely challenging. And regarding, and I believe that's David Hartshorn. You may want to come off mute if you'd like to ask this question, but regarding the affordability of the challenge, I'll let you ask. I see David's coming off.
Yes. Hi,
Hi.
Claire. Thank you so much, and such a great overview of the challenges and the opportunities to improve adoption for women and girls. I think I've asked a few questions here, and I think the one Erin is referencing, I think you and I discussed this in New York City at the UN General Assembly, and it was basically on affordability. Is there currently a focus at GSMA to leverage circular economy, refurbished digital systems, handsets, smartphones, anything, to drive costs down and address some of the aims of circular economy? We do have a pilot underway. I think I mentioned maybe during our meeting, a pilot underway on a largely gender-focused project that we have in Poland and and in Ukraine right now. And we have a capability through N50 partners to extend that type of activity into sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm just wondering, is that something that is of interest to GSMA? Might that be a traction point where we could work together?
Yeah, I mean, we look at affordability in three different ways, and we have different teams working on it in different ways. So one is around reducing the cost of device, and our research shows that the cost of device isn't likely to go down very much. I mean, there's a huge portion of the cost around tax. So around typically an average cost device is about 30% is sort of related to tax. So that tax just makes it less affordable for people who are poor. So we look at that aspect. We look at this sort of, as mentioned, the device financing, and then we look at circular economy. There's a whole team in GSMA that looks at that side of things. So we kind of, that three-pronged way of making it more affordable, say reducing costs, improving access to sort of financing options, and then looking at the circular economy. So yeah, all three of those areas are areas that we look at and work on actively.
Thanks, Claire.
So I'm happy to put you in touch with the person who's leading on the circular economy, if that's helpful.
Hey, Erin, can I ask Claire a follow-up question?
Sure.
I'm really interested in the tax aspect of what you just described. And I'm wondering, are there examples of successful practice where a government ministry has put in place advantageous waivers for taxes on systems that are going to go to women and or girls?
I mean, there's a team on GSMA works on tax, so they could answer that question probably more directly. I mean, we have seen governments that have, both some that have reduced the tax on devices, both, but also we've seen conversely at ones that have increased. So I think I'll put you in touch with the team who does a lot of studies on the tax question, and they could give you more information.
Many thanks again.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, that would be a great follow-up to kind of dig into what are some of the new tactics being iterated around to address some of these challenges as they arise. And we do have a question from another attendee around what additional questions should we ask in the future to get additional insights beyond the existing learnings around affordability, access, and other gaps. Are there questions that, I don't know if they keep you up at night, but other questions
Yeah.
to ponder, right? To think about in shifting the survey itself.
Yeah. So yeah, on that, it's a good question. So there's one big shift that we're doing this year, which I'm very excited about, is we've always asked what's stopping you from going online. We're now going to we're asking as well, what's stopping you from using the internet more? It'd be interesting to see how those barriers change. But every year we have like what we call a rotating module, where we try and sort of double click at an area that just needs some questions answered, sort of one-off questions. We've done it on handset affordability in the past. We've done digital skills. This year and so it'll come out in next year's report. We're double clicking on some questions around social norms, but also on sort of safety and security issues, because I think that is an area that is under-researched and needs more information. So we're trying to understand things like how much of this is around people's perceived concerns versus real experience concerns. How are they experiencing them? What are the things that would help kind of them feel safer, that kind of stuff. So we're trying to answer some questions on that. But I think there's a lot of questions that this is a ever-moving area. I think safety and security related issues are an issue that needs more attention, and we're going to be doing a lot more work at GSMA looking at on gender-based violence and safety and security concerns. I think a new topic that's coming up that needs some attention is around AI and its gender impact and some of those things. We're not touching that in our survey, but I think it's a topic that's certainly got a gender dimension and needs some attention as well. But there's always questions, but I think the social norms question is very, very tricky. We actually did some analysis a few years ago. We looked at our data and we looked at if men and women, if we held it like had the same levels of education and same levels of income as each other, so we held those constant, would there still be a gender gap? And the answer was there would be still a substantial gender gap, as in just being a woman meant that you were less likely, which just shows how social norms and discrimination and things are playing out. Because if you had the same level of income and education, there was still going to be a significant mobile gender gap. So, so I think those are very tricky issues. I think, though, that we understand the barriers quite well now. I mean, the barriers aren't changing. We have a lot. What I think there's a less understanding is the approaches and solutions to addressing them. I think we need to know more about the things that are working and also the context specificness to them. So certain things work in certain countries, but you can't always replicate or apply them in other countries. And understanding some of those dimensions is quite challenging. So I think that the issue is more understanding some of the kind of approaches and solutions and what works and in what contexts. So
right, yeah, and that does remind me of we have several N50 partners who specialize in the behavioral science, the human side behind change, and looking at that kind of social construct through human-centered design strategies, and really going to that local level and learning from the women and girls themselves to design those solutions and strategies. Are you seeing some of those kind of behavioral science approaches utilized that are being successful in these gender projects?
Yeah, a lot of user-centered design, a lot of engagement with gatekeepers, a lot of experiment around that, but it's just a tricky, difficult issue. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, but yes, there's a lot of our partners who are very much taking the user-centered design approach and really working to try and engage with those gatekeepers to try and overcome some of these challenges.
And Lousy, I see your hand is up.
Hi, me again. So Claire, yeah, very interesting what Erin said as well. A mindset
change can be one of the most difficult things to deal with, especially in what you're trying to do. But also moving away from, like you said, affordability and looking at comparisons between men and women having the same income levels, same education levels. What about the women themselves? What are they saying? Do they actually see this as a challenge, this gap? And also, do they feel that mobile internet access and usage is particularly relevant to them, especially I'll zero into more the peri-urban and rural areas, for example, because I mean, looking at Zambia, those are people who've probably never been exposed to this or even been exposed to it that much. So ultimately, is it a situation where you don't even know what you're missing out on, so you just continue to live without it anyway?
Yeah, as I said in our surveys, in most countries, levels of awareness of internet is high at 80%. I would say most people are probably aware of more of the kind of communication side of thing. We've just published a report on female micro entrepreneurs' use of mobile. And again, almost it was 100% awareness amongst that segment of the internet for communication purposes, but less for others. So I think there is an issue around awareness of the ways that it can more broadly benefit people beyond. So as I said in our survey, it shows that people, when they use the internet, women are using it every single day, most of the case daily, but they're not using it for such a diverse range of activities as men. And I think there is a sort of awareness challenge around once you get online, to kind of understanding how it could benefit in different ways your life. And that is certainly a challenge. But when we ask people who are using it, is it, because we want to know whether, because of all the negative, aspects of the internet, and overwhelmingly people are the women who are going online and using it in different ways are saying just how much it benefits them, and the by far positive more than negative. So it's interesting, even on the safety issue, we ask a question, women are often saying they feel much safer with a mobile. Improves their safety. At the same time, they report safety and harassment, insecurity as a barrier as well. So there's kind of a double-edged sword, but overwhelmingly the people who are using the internet are reporting the kind of positive. We do ask people the positive negatives, and but I agree that beyond basic kind of communications, there's more work to be done around raising awareness of how it could be used in ways that can benefit people's lives.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. So there is a question in the Q&A that one of our attendees says, we've run into the following scenario very often throughout Africa. People own smartphones, but the cost of mobile data is astronomical. So their ability to take full advantage of their phones and being connected is limited. So in my mind, there's affordability of the device and then the affordability of the data itself. Can you talk more about any data you have on mobile data cost and how are mobile data costs regulated?
Yeah, so in our State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report, I'll try and put it in the chat, the link. We do look at the cost of data at a regional level, and so including it. So in Africa, the cost of data has been decreasing and continues to decrease, but it is a challenge, and I think this is what we're looking forward to seeing in this next report, when we look at what is the barriers to using internet more than you currently do. So if just getting online in the first place is overwhelmingly a handset affordability issues, how much does data play? But I'll just get the link here for our other report, which gives you the data costs compared to costs and affordability in the different regions of both data and handsets. So in handsets, affordability of handsets last year in Africa went up, it became significantly less affordable, but data costs have gone down. That's not saying that they're not a barrier. Of course, there is a barrier. I'm just going to I'm going to add the link to this report, which has much more on the costs affordability. I'm just putting it put it in the chat.
Thanks for that.
I think I just put it in the wrong place. I put it to everybody. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, it reminds me of N50 projects in general are always, trying to solve around multiple aspects of that affordability challenge, whether it's device, whether it's data cost. And so that is, I mean, that's a really great example of these are the types of models that come out of N50 projects, trying to drive down those costs and what things can be tweaked around the edges to help make that cost come down.
And I should add in, a lot of the times when our partners are doing digital skills training, they often combine it with giving free data to allow people to go online and practice and such. That's a common practice.
Right. And as you think about the N50 team, the For WomenKind team, you know, we represent many organizations committed to this work. How do you think that this particular team that is made up of multiple organizations could apply itself for best effect going forward? Is it through advocacy? Is it project design? Is it M&E? Or other ideas that you might have about how we could best leverage this For WomenKind team?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, if anybody's doing any projects in this space, I would highly encourage you to do some good evaluation and share that. We're also reach out. We're happy we're always keen to publish learnings from projects, what's gone well, what's not gone well, to kind of share with our group, our stakeholders. But I think we need to learn more about solutions, what works, what doesn't. So would highly encourage evaluation and sharing of that evaluation. And then just sort of collaboration, if anybody's doing any work, to kind of share it with each other, with all of us together, so we can see how we can collaborate and work. That's what we've done with Equals, for example, identified projects that people are doing in specific countries and then got other partners involved to support. We did that in Rwanda with the Digital Ambassadors Program, for example. It was led by an organization called DOT, but then a number of other organizations joined in and supported. So these are the things I think, if we can just share what we're each doing and see how we can each kind of collaborate and sort of help each other, that would be great. But yeah, also any learnings that people have, we're certainly, I say, like at GSMA, we're very much consumers of data. We use, I mean, the reason we do our surveys, because the data's not there. I wish we didn't have to do it. I wish the data was there. But where there is data, we are huge consumers of it, and very evidence-driven in our work. So if anybody has any insights or learnings from their projects, we would certainly love to hear it. I'm sure others would too.
Yeah, that's an important point, and that data comes in multiple forms, right? And so, and kind of playing off of a question that's in the chat, but also thinking about the stories, right? The examples, and that's why we often tune into webinars like this, is to hear directly from folks about their personal experience, the stories that stick with you of maybe some projects that are having a particular impact or resonating with you in a certain way today, different than maybe it did a couple of weeks ago. What would you pull out and highlight, either as an example of, you know, behavioral science having an impact in a project, or just a project itself that's really interesting to you, that has changed the way you think about the gender digital equity space?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a particular product, but I would say that my team is very closely monitoring what's happening on this sort of handset affordability device financing, because it's a new area and it hasn't been evaluated very much, but it has huge potential because it's such a big barrier. And so that's an area I'm really looking forward to kind of getting more insights and learnings from. It's a complicated challenge involving many stakeholders, from sort of OEMs to device, you know, sort of banks to the operators. They all need to kind of partner together on these sort of initiatives, and they're tricky. So really looking forward to seeing and monitoring what's happening in that space to see the outcomes. Yeah, and I think the other one that we're monitoring is a sort of like the safety and security issue, and seeing how that's playing out. I think, you know, it's, you know, developments again are, some of the technology developments are not sort of in favor of, are not very helpful in terms of some of these sort of online safety issues. So yeah, monitoring that. But I would just say that, see, I mean, we get a lot of people say, well, we want to launch something or do something to reach women. And we just keep saying the same answer. Like, just look at what you're doing that's already scaled or reaching, and see how you can tweak it and be gender intentional. Because it's typically not about creating a new thing or doing something new. It's about looking at what mainstream products or what mainstream things you have. Maybe it's digital skills training, maybe it's a certain product or service, and seeing how you can really be gender intentional about it and really think about how you can tweak and modify it to make sure that you are reaching those women. And I think where we see huge impact is where that happens. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Gender intentional with it's looking at the work that is underway. It's not necessarily creating something brand new. It's really being intentional about what are you doing now that you can be more intentional about. And that kind of follows along with our last question about, you know, any final piece of advice that you would give to this listenership around this topic before we close out.
I guess, I mean, if I was to give people, you know, sort of advice on kind of trying to tackle, I would say set targets. If you're an organization, you know, set them. We see that people set targets. It really makes a difference. And then, yeah, look at, you know, what are the biggest barriers and see how you can tackle them, but also thinking about the other barriers at the same time. But yeah, I think just having that gender intentional approach and really having those targets that you're being held accountable to at an organization level makes a big difference.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And Claire, we really appreciate your taking the time today to join us. And this is incredible work that you're deeply involved in. We are grateful that you are a N50 partner and a constant source of inspiration and a way for us to check ourselves in N50 projects to make sure that we're aligning with what best practices and research is showing, and helping us stay very gender intentional as we move forward. So we appreciate you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I see some thanks coming through in the chat. Hopefully you're seeing those as well. But really hope you have a great rest of your day. It's closing in on the end of your day, I believe. So really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate all those who have tuned in to learn with us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Our next speaker series will likely be in January, so watch for those posts on social media as well as in your calendar invites, and we look forward to seeing everyone back here again at that time. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.